Obviously, I survived.
So I understand you had a wonderful time.
It was a good time.
How was the plane?
Hard. But,
How many hours were you on?
not very long. It just, a flight to Denver and then 2 hours to, but still.
It's all good. I'm glad you had a good time.
Thank you.
And I mean, it's totally amazing what they did.
Good. How are you doing? Hey, good. Survived the snow, I guess.
I mean, they had to open it. But that's one thing on the raft.
I thought you were ready to go. I liked it. It was great. Yeah, I was saying, because like, that's it.
They put some
I had a question. Does it have something to do with the resurrection?
she says the only thing that she's going to say but when she told us about the scene,
So it looks like you guys made it back from California. You look nice today. Very nice. I was just going to say, I bet the weather was a lot better there, wasn't it?
Well, the Bay Area is kind of all year long. So, it's in bloom. But it starts blooming in February there. So, the azaleas, everything were out. The hummingbirds were out, everything.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful here.
But it was, it was coolish. But it was nice.
Yeah. That part of California is not like Southern California.
It is
like
not.
they're saying. It's more,
It is not. It's
more of a wet.
It's kind of 60s, 70s all year long, and it's damp 70. It's not like 70 here where the sun shines and heats you up really quickly. It's damp 70.
And it's always hazy there.
Yeah.
All the times I've been in San Francisco, it's
They
always
call it
hazy.
you can see it coming over the bay, and they call it the finger of doom. It just covers everything. But it wasn't so hazy when we were there. It was unusually nice.
That's great. That's probably the place I probably wouldn't want to live.
I got it wrong.
Just because, that haze and it's always kind of damp, kind of humid. But, still unique. It's a unique place.
But our daughter has a view of the bay and the Golden Bridge. They're in Berkeley, so they're right across the bay. And they have a view, and it's, the view makes up for everything when you have it. When the haze is not over.
That it does, yeah.
It's really good.
Boy, they're in a nice place. They have a nice house. If they have a view of the Golden Gate Bridge and the bay and everything.
Well, it's not fancier because we bought it for the view, so,
Well, not fancy house there is $1 million. So, I don't afford it.
I can't even imagine.
Hey, Tony
Never
B.
understood that. My grandparents lived out there, not in that part of the world. A little bit further south. And, it was when we visited as kids, it was always such a beautiful place to go. But the cost was even expensive in those days.
But, the food is so much better and so much fresher. And,
Well, good morning, church family and friends.
You're right. I mean, I agree with that. Yeah.
Do we have a microphone on? I can't tell if I'm on or off. I'm on. Good morning, Walmart shoppers. Just checking. Yeah. I could have said Kmart, but there's no more Kmart. Yeah. Good morning to everyone who is tuned in on Zoom or on YouTube today. Welcome, visitors and friends. Today's Bible class is entitled Christ Dies and Rises to New Life. We'll be looking at Matthew chapter 27, verses 39 to 40, 45 to 54. For prep on this class, I've thrown in some extra verses. And then Matthew 28, 1 to 10. You know, the Bible is a time machine. When we start reading, whether it's in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, it takes us back to a point in time that we can be, basically, we get a front seat at what is going on. Like Christ's Sermon on the Mount, we get a front seat for that. And we get a front seat at the crucifixion. One thing I'd like to point out is when Christ was on the cross, one of the translations said there were some bystanders, and they were shaking their heads. And they were saying things like, well, if he's the Son of God, why doesn't God take him off that cross and rescue him? Jesus had said himself, if I wanted to, I could call 10,000 angels. But that was not his way. That was the worldly way. So Christ dies and rises. And so fear not, because Jesus lives. We say that we call this, in a worldly way, this is Easter. And I'll be talking about what Easter used to be and what it now is, because the old way was quite different than what we have today. It's sort of like we mark certain events in the life of Christ. We mark his birth. We mark when he becomes a man at 30 years of age, and he starts his 3-year ministry that is looking towards this event on a cross. And then, of course, the resurrection. So we have to talk about his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, and one more, his promise to come back. And so we have to proclaim those events. So, how will you live a fearless life as a believer, as a Christian, in the light of the resurrection of Jesus? So, here are 7 Christian beliefs that we need to take note of. That 7, Jesus is the Son of God. The belief that Jesus is God's Son and forms a part of what we call the Trinity, or the Godhead. And then incarnation, the belief that God came in the form of Jesus, and Jesus walked upon this earth, being God and man at the same time. Atonement. This is what happened when they crucified Jesus. That was atonement. That is the belief that Jesus' death on the cross pays for, in advance, for the sins of all mankind. While we were still sinners, Christ dies for the ungodly. And then the crucifixion, the belief that Jesus was nailed to a cross and died. And then the resurrection, the belief that after his death, Jesus came back to life, by the power of God 3 days later. And then the ascension, the belief that 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus went back into heaven and now sits at the very right hand of God, making intercession for us. And then the second coming, the belief that Jesus will come back again in the future. But I believe, and I hope you believe, that I believe that Jesus is coming in my lifetime, that Jesus could come today. And so I prepare myself for that event rather than be taken by surprise. Christians are or should be prepared for that. Now, the story of Jesus on the cross, him dying and being buried in an empty tomb that was never used. I believe it was owned by Joseph of Arimathea. And that on the third day, Jesus is risen from the grave. He is not here. This is the most amazing story of all time. So, no story hits like the story of Jesus, his death and his resurrection, because it has a lot of moving parts. It's filled with the betrayal of Judas. It's filled with injustice. It's filled with courage. This is a powerful story that even confronts our greatest enemy, death itself. In the book of Revelation, there is this depiction early on in I believe it's the first chapter. There is this figure that we believe is a figure of Jesus. He has pure white hair and he's dressed in this long outfit with a golden sash, and he is holding in his hands a set of keys. And those set of keys are death and Hades. And so we call this the Easter season. But in the church, it's not about bunnies and eggs. It's not about bunnies and eggs. For the children, yes, it's about bunnies and eggs. But within God's kingdom, God's church, it's not about that. Eggs and bunnies were a symbol of fertility and new life. And you've already guessed it, that Easter will become attached to the resurrection story, whether we like it or not. So, we get the opportunity to listen again as if for the first time. In 1 Corinthians 5 and 7, Jesus is called our Paschal Lamb. What is rather different is by the time you get to the letter that's being written by the Apostle Paul to the Corinthian church, a lot of things have changed. I think more and more they are moving away from being attached to Judaism, because Christianity is not about Judaism. It's not about any other religion that we might think of that is not Christian. So, it's a story that is ever new because you go back to it again and again. You ever read a book that's so good you read it more than once? Dorothy, how many times have you read a particular book?
There's two that I read all the time. This Present Darkness, and I forgot the title of the other one, but I read those over and over. I believe in the world, it's a fictional story. But for me, it talks about the fight between angels and demons and a church remnant praying.
I see. Okay.
And it makes it, for me, it makes it come alive.
So it appeals to you.
Yes.
And you go back to it again and again. When Christians observe for instance, the Lord's Supper that we do every week, we are proclaiming his death, essentially, but also a death that comes with a burial, and the burial comes with a 3-day promise, the resurrection. And we do that until what? Jesus comes. So, getting into the text, following Peter's confession, remember in Matthew 16, Jesus will say, who do men say that I am? And he said, well, some say you're this, Jesus. Some say you're the prophet. Some say you're Elijah. And then Jesus says, but what I really want to know, fellas, is who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you know, flesh and blood has not revealed that to you. That didn't come from humans. That came from my Father in heaven. And so that's one of the hallmarks. It's one of the milestones in faith. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So his disciples, however, failed to comprehend time and time again from the scriptures what Jesus was talking about. Jesus started to tell them, you know, they're going to come and they're going to arrest me. I'm going to go to trial. They're going to hurt me. And then they're going to crucify me. And then Jesus says, but I'm also going to rise on the 3rd day. However, some of that got lost because some of the disciples, if not all of them, failed to understand from the scriptures what Jesus was telling them. So, we've already asked Dorothy about her favorite book. Anyone, what's your favorite movie? Mine's Braveheart. Anyone else? It's a Wonderful Life? Well, whether it's a book or a movie, if it's a book that's so good or a movie that's so good, sometimes you want to see it again. You want to hear it again. You want to read it again. And so there are sometimes memorable parts in a book. There are memorable parts in a movie. And it sticks in your mind, and that's why you want to go and read that book again or go back to that chapter, go back to that scene, because it touches something in us, something that makes us react. So I've seen Braveheart more than once, do you think? Although Mel Gibson, I have some other opinions about him playing William Wallace. Does it affect you differently when you watch or read something again and again? Does it bring something home? For instance, if it's a spiritual book or if it's a passage out of the Bible, it touches our hearts. Now, the death of the king. Matthew 27, 39 to 40, 45 to 54. We'll break it up as follows. A, he is forsaken by people. That'll be verses 39 to 40. And then on the cross, and in keeping with what you read about, and I'll just give you a heads up, you'll have to go to Psalm 22 to start thinking about how that particular psalm mentions so many things about what was happening at the trial, at the cross, and later. And what does he say, verses 45 to 50? This is him. My God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe that's the pinnacle moment where Jesus felt so alone. God was not right there with him. But yet he talks to his father and he says, Father, forgive them for they do not know what they're doing. And then he also says, into your hands I commend my spirit. And he bows his head and he dies. In verses 51 to 54, there are a lot of things that are signs that come with what's happening during what we call, or what some people call, Holy Week, but the run-up to his trial, the crucifixion, his death, and his resurrection 3 days later. So, here is, again, Matthew 27. I want to include 37 and 38 because this is important. So above Jesus' head, this is on the orders of Pilate. Pilate says, I have written what I have written. Don't you try and change anything. The Jews were objecting to the placard that would be above Jesus' head. So above Jesus' head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. And then verse 39. And those who passed by, they were hurling insults at him. It's sort of like there's this morbid curiosity of some people to go and watch an execution, to go and watch horrible scenes of carnage. And then there were those who would come and they would say things like this. Those who passed by, they hurled these insults, shaking their heads. You who are going to destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days, save yourself, come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. He is the Son of God. Why does he stay on the cross? Because he is our atonement. He's paying the price.
It was his Father's will for him. He asked, if there's any other way, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will.
Correct. And by the way, that's a little insight to what was it like? Of course, I don't know. You don't know. But what was it like for Jesus to be all man and God too in one body? And the flesh speaks. If there's another way, let this cup be passed. But not my will be done, but your will. The book of Hebrews talks about how he tasted death for all men. That's what he was doing on the cross. So, if you're the Son of God, come down. You know, that's poking fun. That's mockery. And so, verses 41 to 43, in the same way, the chief priests, they get into it. The teachers of the law and the elders, they mocked him. He saved others. But he can't save himself. He was too busy saving them. But they didn't know it. He said he can save others, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel, they shouted. And let him come down now from the cross. And then we will believe him. Well, he trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And since he didn't come down from the cross, they concluded he's not the Son of God. Tony.
Raising Lazarus wasn't enough for him?
Yes, and actually they hatched a little plan to get rid of Lazarus too. That's what John talks about in his gospel. Now, remember those two thieves? The robbers who had been crucified with him also insulting him with the same kinds of words. Well,
What were those two? Thieves? You don't get crucified from stealing bread in the market.
Yeah.
We have robbers here. Actually, they were insurrectionists.
yes.
Two things you would do that would get you crucified because they wanted to make a point. Saying you're king, which is what they crucified Jesus for,
Yeah.
and leading a slave rebellion, which
Yes.
is what Spartacus did.
Like Bar Kokhba.
Yes. So they were insurrectionists.
So in one of the translations, instead of robbers, it says criminals. I haven't come across the word insurrection, but that is the vein. You know, they released Barabbas.
Yeah.
That is a contradiction in
Well,
terms.
the difference between thief and robber. Thief
Yeah.
steals, a robber injures or kills the person, like the good Samaritan.
Samaritan. Yes. Now in Luke 23, 40 to 43, the one thief that was there with Jesus, he changes his heart. He changes his insult by telling the other robber or the other insurrectionist, that's enough. He says, we are here condemned justly, but this man has done nothing wrong. He says, remember me when you come into your kingdom, please. And Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise. What do you mean? He got a ticket to paradise and didn't have to take all those classes? As far as we know, he wasn't baptized. Well, let me tell you something. What you have at the cross are two things coming together. One of those things is being fulfilled right there and then. The Old Testament has a period right at the end of the Old Testament. It's over. And how do we know it's over? Because the curtain that's 3 or 4 inches thick and took 300 priests to hang it, that curtain tears from top to bottom. That's an unusual thing. And we learn from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, I think it's at verse 19, that Jesus opened up by his flesh a way to God. He had been telling people, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except he comes through me. So, verse 45, this is dramatic. At noon, when the sun is high, when the sun is so bright, darkness falls across the whole land until 3 o'clock. By the way, John says that Judas, when he went out to go and betray Jesus, Jesus says, Judas, whatever you're going to do, do it quickly. And then it said, John writes, and it was night. It sets the tone, doesn't it? Serious. But here, at noon until 3 o'clock, it goes dark. What in the world is going on? Is this an eclipse? Don't know. Let's look at the text. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice. There are 7 statements off of the cross that Jesus gives. One of those statements is, he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which interpreted means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if you go back to Psalm 22, look for those words. When some of those standing there heard this, they said, oh, he must be calling Elijah. By the way, at the Mount of Transfiguration, beside Moses and Jesus being there on the mountain, who else shows up? Elijah. And so they're saying, Eli, you would think that Jewish believers, Jews themselves, they would know this song. He's calling for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a stick, on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. One of the things he says on the cross is, I thirst. And the rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. First, they said, God's going to save him. If he's the Son of God, let God come down and do the job. Let's see if Elijah's coming to his rescue. This is all being rubbed in to the pain, the suffering, and the humiliation. And when Jesus had cried out again in a big, loud voice, watch what happens next. He gave up his spirit. Atonement is complete. Salvation is at hand. We know salvation is at hand is when the angel who shows up and tells Mary Magdalene and others, he's not here. Look, see the place where they laid him. He's gone. Where? We'll find out. It got dark. Have you ever been in a situation where all of a sudden the atmosphere changes and the clouds come in and it's dark? Maybe before a storm. But there are things going on at this cross with him on it. Darkness, the darkness of sin, and Jesus is dealing with the darkness of sin. You know what sin is? It has separated us from God. Jesus is the joiner. He is the mediator. He is the one who brings the offenders to God the Father through the cross. In the darkness of humiliation, they humiliated him. He became sin who knew no sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God. So that darkness is all about sin, is about separation and him trying to bring peace and bring victory and salvation. That happens in 3 days. The darkness of humiliation. Alex, Isaiah 53, he was cut off. He was forsaken. He had to do it by himself. Not with God prompting him. Not with God intervening. There would be no intervention on the cross. And when he died, I think Satan was doing a little jig. I got him. But 3 days later, while everything seems to be silent, God says, "Oh, no, you don't." And he raises him from the dead.
So apparently, Satan didn't know the plan of salvation. And Paul says in Corinthians, if the dark forces had known that God was going to do this, they would have never crucified him.
Because they were too busy believing a lie. That's what 2 Thessalonians teaches us.
Doesn't Paul call it the mystery?
The mystery,
Which
yes.
has just now been revealed.
Yep. Cut off or forsaken. So I ask you, without giving direct advice, how would you counsel someone who feels that they have been forsaken by God? Any thoughts?
Join the club. Even Jesus felt that.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who feel they don't have anybody to live for. They feel abandoned. They feel alone. They feel despair. What do you say? Do you talk to them with platitudes? That doesn't work. Somehow you've got to reach to them with what you know about Jesus and transfer that knowledge, that love, that care. Sometimes when you sit with someone who feels abandoned and forsaken, maybe the best thing you could do before you open your mouth is to sit with them in the silence. To hold their hands. Maybe to pray later on. So, what are some spiritual disciplines that you have, I have, that will help us to sustain our faith in God? How about prayer? You know, is your prayer just repetition, repetition, repetition? Or does prayer need to be like a conversation? And if we make our faith and we share our faith as it is a conversation with Christ, a conversation with God, that we are walking with God, that we are walking with Christ. I saw this poster one time about a girl. She's crying. Whatever. We don't know what she's done. Could have been a man too. We don't know what they've done, but they know people have abandoned them. And beside it, it says, "Don't worry. I've been there before. I love you. Jesus." Rather than showing them the door when they break the rules, when they fall off the wagon, when they have an unexpected pregnancy out of wedlock, or they've been through a divorce. The church needs to be prepared to apply the balm of God through Jesus for all of those. We need them inside rather than cast them to the outside. So, during those stress-filled times when it feels like God is distant, we reach out for God and we feel, I can't see him, I don't know where he is. Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." When the world is falling down like the mountains rolling into the sea, I'm here. So, what evidence for Christ do you find best to use when talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ? Do we pull out a bunch of manuscripts? Do we start quoting a bunch of dates and all of that? You know, Jesus works best when he lives in us. Peter writes, "Be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within you, because people are going to ask. You're different. I want what you have. How do I get it?" And then that gives us an entree, an entrance to talk about Jesus, what he's done for me. Dorothy, you're really good at that. So, how would you respond to a fellow Christian who believes that giving their personal testimony? Now, Ralph and I have talked about testimony and like giving evidence, like you go to a court. Our testimony doesn't have to be a whole list of facts. We have to grow up into Christ. Ephesians 4, verse 15. Some people think that it's best to give your personal testimony about Christ as an approach to evangelism based on historical evidence. When it comes down to it, which is better? Historical evidence or being the evidence? Christ is in me. He who is in us is greater than he who is in this world. So, I go back to verse 50. And when Jesus had cried out again in this loud voice, he gave up his spirit. So what happened next? As I said, this is a time machine. We can go back in time with Matthew. We can go back in time with Mark and Luke and John. Back in time with all of the books of the Bible. But this is special. When he breathed his last, all of this happened. The temple veil was torn top to bottom. And that veil, that series of curtains, I don't know if it was one big curtain or if it was several sections, but each section or one section was like 3 to 4 inches thick. Have you ever tried to tear up a phone book about that size? You do yourself a mischief. The temple veil was torn as he died. The rocks are split. There's an earthquake. Tombs get opened. What? Many dead holy people, saints we call them, were raised from the dead. They came out of their graves after Christ was raised, and they went into Jerusalem and appeared to many people that they were alive.
They were probably dead for more than 4 days. They stinketh.
Oh, they stinketh. Better than a pound of nard.
That's the story of Lazarus on steroids.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about dead people.
Oh, yeah.
People who were dead, people knew that they were dead.
Yep.
They actually come out of the grave and then go into the city.
Go into the city of Jerusalem. And I think that we'd be heading for the temple. Because if you're dead, You need to be what? You need to be cleansed. You need to get a certified, hey, you're no longer dead, you're alive. And maybe you had to go through a 7-day waiting period. I don't know.
And the Sanhedrin still didn't change.
Oh. You know, they probably said, oh, those people, they weren't in any grave. They came out of the mountains. They're strangers. They went to those graves. Those graves were open and empty, just as open and empty as Jesus' tomb. So, there's an artist's depiction of the temple curtain being torn in two, top to bottom. Mike, could you read Hebrews 10, 19 to 20, because this explains this.
Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body.
This way to God through me. What he was saying was, it's over, folks, up at Temple. But the temple would continue for at least another 30 years or so till AD 70 comes and the temple is completely destroyed. I'm the way, the truth, and the life, John 14 and 6. Jesus is this new and living way. Don't go to temple, come to me. So, Matthew 27 and 54, the centurion said, surely or truly this man was the Son of God. I wonder what other changes came to this man. Because he saw how he died. There was no cursing. There was no anything like that. He suffered. Crucifixion was a cruel death. So, the tomb, the grave is opened. That's verses 1 to 4 of Matthew 28. The good news of his rising is announced. The Lord is recognized, verses 8 to 10. And I hear the second bell coming. So, what I wanted to tell you, why in the world do we have Easter? For Christians, it's not chocolate eggs and bunny rabbits. That's for the children. Okay, you can go out and buy a chocolate egg. But Easter was rooted in paganism. Do you know there's only one place in the Bible that says Easter? Eh? And that's if you have a King James version of the Scriptures, and you go to Acts 12 and verse 4, instead of reading as most translations read, Passover, the King James translators, instead of using Paschal, Passover, they insert the word Easter. By the end of the first century, going into the second century, the word Easter starts to come into the early church. And by 150, it's there. By 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, they set the date for something that has already been accepted in the 2nd and 3rd century and 4th century churches and beyond, the use of the term Easter. What did Christians call it? In the 1st century, they called it Resurrection Day. They called it Christ's Resurrection Day. What do we do at the supper? We proclaim his death. But there are other things. His birth we need to proclaim. His life we need to proclaim. His death, his resurrection, his ascension, and his return. Essentially, that's what we need to be doing. We'll stop there. Thank you. There's always never enough time. But there you go.